What is EDGI? EDGI is actually the largest genetic study of eating disorders ever to be undertaken. It's a global study, and we are funded by the National Institute of Mental Health in the United States. And that grant funds sites in the United States, in New Zealand, in Australia, and in Denmark. And our goal is to actually collect genetic material from saliva, as well as information from questionnaires on as many people with eating disorders as we possibly can. And when we say eating disorders, we mean anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder. One thing that's really important to communicate is that even though it's called the Eating Disorders Genetics Initiative, our research is really focusing on both environmental and genetic causes of eating disorders. And I think once you participate and start filling out our questionnaires, it'll become clear that we're really interested in both sides of the equation. I think for too long, people have talked about nature or nurture, or genes or environment. One of the things that we're really passionate about is making sure that people understand that it is both. Both genes and environment contribute to these illnesses, and our job is to figure out how they act both independently and co-act and interact. And that's really why we're trying to get information from both sides. We're collecting saliva to get the genetic material, and we're collecting this information online from all of the surveys and questionnaires so that we can really put them together to understand the full picture underlying these illnesses. Another misconception about eating disorders is that they're somehow selective about who they affect. And that is absolutely not the case. We know that eating disorders affect a diverse range of people. The problem has been that they're not always equally detected in the community, probably because of stereotypes. So sometimes, for example, a physician might only be thinking about eating disorders when a particular profile of a person walks through that office door. So part of what we're really trying to do in EDGI is make sure that we recruit people from across all sorts of different dimensions. We want all genders, we want people from all socioeconomic backgrounds, we want people from all ethnicities and ancestries and races. We really want to know how to represent eating disorders as they live in the community, not just the people who were detected by the healthcare system. What we discovered in our last study was that the genes that contribute to anorexia nervosa don't only affect psychiatric illnesses, but they also affect metabolic parameters. So that actually led us to almost reconceptualize anorexia nervosa as what we called a Metabo psychiatric illness. And what that means to us is that it's very important to focus on both psychiatric and metabolic factors in order to first understand the illness, but second, develop better treatments for anorexia nervosa. EDGI, or the Eating Disorders Genetics Initiative, is really the next generation of our genetic studies of eating disorders. Our previous studies focused primarily on anorexia nervosa, but now we're really broadening our research out because we really want to understand all of the eating disorders. So we're also inviting people who have bulimia nervosa or binge eating disorder to participate. Participation in EDGI is actually quite easy. So all you need to do is go up to the website and you'll see a little box on the website that will say, take our survey. And you click that box, and of course we'll ask for your informed consent so that you understand what you'll actually be doing as part of the research. And after you give us informed consent, we'll ask you a bunch of questions about the history of your eating disorder, and that will determine if you're eligible or not. And then we invite you to do a bunch more questionnaires, not just about eating. We're also asking questions about your mood, about things like depression and anxiety. We're asking about your just life history, so events that you might have experienced in your life. And then we actually send you a little saliva kit in the mail. And all you do with that saliva kit is you spit into it. And then you package it back up and pop it in the post, and that comes back to us. And thanks to some amazing technology, we can take that saliva sample and do some sort of scientific processing to it, and that's what we extract your DNA or your genetic material from. So by doing this work and participating in EDGI, what we'll have is a very large sample of people who have had eating disorders at some time in their life from many countries around the world. And we'll have a lot of deep information about them from the questionnaires that you complete, as well as your DNA from your saliva sample. And what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to combine those two pieces of information to really start to understand how genes contribute to different components of an eating disorder. They might help us tease out, for example, why some people with anorexia also become depressed, or why some people with bulimia nervosa develop anxiety disorders. Part of the beauty of this kind of work is we can start developing much more sophisticated understandings of the course of illness, the comorbid or the co-occurring illnesses that happen with eating disorders, and obviously, ultimately, our goals are to develop better treatments. Many people wonder how we're going to use the results that we get from the Eating Disorders Genetics Initiative. Obviously, one of the most important things for us is really to develop new treatments for eating disorders. Right now, we sort of have a one-size-fits-all approach to the treatment of these illnesses. I often use the example of blood pressure. So if you go in to see your primary care physician, your GP, and you have high blood pressure, your doctor has a whole toolbox of options that they can try to treat you with. You can start with diet and exercise, and then there are all sorts of different classes of medications. And it basically gives us the opportunity to treat people whose blood pressure might stem from very different sources. One of the things that we struggle with in eating disorders is our clinician's toolbox doesn't have as many options in it. So we often find ourselves using the same treatment for many people, even if the origin of their eating disorder or the nature of their eating disorder might be different. So what we're hoping first is that our genetic research might actually reveal some biological pathways that we're not aware of at this point that could help us point to some of the underlying biology in these illnesses. What goes on in your body biologically that can make you at risk for developing an eating disorder, or that can sustain the eating disorder, or affect your course of your eating disorder. So for example, some people develop a really severe and enduring course of anorexia nervosa, but the first time they walk into our office for treatment, we have no way of predicting that. So one thing we're wondering is whether the genetic research will be able to identify people who are at risk for developing certain forms of eating disorders over time. We're also very interested in the extent to which genetics or your genetic profile can predict who's going to respond to what kind of treatments. Right now, we sort of have a one-size-fits-all approach to eating disorders, and we have no medications that are effective in treating anorexia nervosa. What we're hoping for is, as our genetic research becomes more rich and more informative, we'll be able to look at a person's genetic profile and have a good idea what the best treatment might be for them. We're seeing these advances in other parts of medicine, and our goal is to hopefully see the same sorts of advances in psychiatry and in eating disorders.